Mm. Yeah.
Chapter 5. An Unexpected Sickness. Stephanie clutched the battered duffel to her chest, the nylon strap digging a crescent into her collarbone as the cab wound its way up the drive. The car's heater was busted, and every inhale stung her nostrils with wet cold and the smell of cigarettes from a previous fare. Out the window, the world blurred. Patches of frostbitten lawn, an orchard's skeleton branches, the shiver of sheep huddled in a distant field. And then suddenly, the house. It didn't look real. More like a set piece, dropped here in the English countryside by some bored film director with a black sense of humor. 3 stories of limestone, every window uniform and forbidding, turrets and chimneys bristling like weapons. The driveway curved into a semicircle, perfectly raked gravel, giving way to a broad portico flanked by stone lions. The cabbie eyed the house in the rear view, then glanced at Stephanie.
"Big place, innit?"
he said, in the local accent that made everything sound slightly mocking. Stephanie shrugged, pressed a banknote into his hand and let herself out. The wind knifed through her hoodie and rattled her teeth. She could already feel the eyes on her, curtains twitching, or maybe just the house itself, flexing its old muscles in anticipation. The front door was massive, double-paneled, a knocker shaped like a griffin's head, snarling at the world. Before she could reach for it, the door swung open. The man standing there was a butler out of central casting. Tall, rigid white hair, so precisely parted it looked like an incision. His uniform was so perfectly pressed, she wondered if it was made of sheet metal. He wore gloves, actual white gloves, and his expression was less welcome than how dare you exist.
"Miss Wilcox?"
he said, and she tried not to flinch at the sound of her own name in such a posh accent.
"We've been expecting you."
She steeled herself, hitched the duffel higher, and stepped inside. The air was immediately several degrees warmer and saturated with the layered scents of polish, beeswax, and some species of flower that she'd only ever seen in supermarket bouquets. The foyer was a cathedral, high ceilings, marble floors, a chandelier the size of a smart car. Every surface gleamed like it had been recently birthed. Stephanie's trainers squeaked embarrassingly, echoing off the black and gold tiles.
"This way, if you please."
The butler didn't wait for her response, simply pivoted and led her through a warren of hallways. Oil portraits of grim, liver-spotted ancestors glared from every wall. The furniture looked not just antique, but actively hostile, chairs with spiked armrests, tables with lions' paw feet ready to maul. She trailed the butler, eyes darting from the intricate carpet patterns to the crystal vases perfectly centered on every flat surface. They passed a sitting room, its doors slightly ajar. In the hush, Stephanie caught a flicker of movement. A woman curled on a velvet settee, a book balanced on her knee, one bare foot tucked beneath her. She wore black yoga pants and a sweatshirt several sizes too large, the sleeves pooled at her wrists. Her hair was a loose mess, and there was a jagged scar above her left eyebrow, still pink and angry-looking. She didn't seem to notice the butler or Stephanie, too absorbed in her reading. Except she did notice. The woman's head snapped up, and she blinked with such naked surprise that it made Stephanie almost recoil. Hazel eyes widened, and the book tumbled from her lap onto the rug. For a second, the air charged, like a magnet finding its opposite pole.
"Hi.
The woman blurted, voice bright and startlingly American.
You're new."
Stephanie's brain shorted for a moment. She glanced at the butler, who had stopped in the doorway and now looked apoplectic. He blocked the threshold with his whole body, as if his silhouette alone could prevent some disaster.
Hi.
Stephanie said, suddenly aware of her own accent and how it sounded compared to the others.
I'm just here to see...
The woman unfolded herself from the settee and crossed the room in quick strides. She moved with a weird, elegant urgency, like a model power-walking in a drill. The closer she got, the younger she seemed. Maybe mid-20s, though the scar and the careful way she held herself made her look older.
My name's Lana.
She said. She pronounced it like Lana, American as fast food. She extended a hand, palm up. Stephanie looked at the hand, then at the butler, then back. What was the etiquette here? She settled for a little wave. The woman's face crumpled with disappointment for a millisecond, then smoothed out into a practiced smile.
I'm not supposed to talk to the staff, but you don't look like staff.
She said.
Are you... Wait, are those limited edition?
Stephanie looked down, confused, and realized that the woman's gaze had shifted to her sneakers. White, with sharp red and blue accents, the logo from her cousin's favorite clothing company stamped on the heel.
Oh, these.
Stephanie lifted a foot, then immediately felt dumb for doing it.
Yeah, my cousin in America sent them for my birthday last year. It's this company called The Underground.
Miss Wilcox,
The butler cut in, his voice suddenly a whip.
if you would please refrain from distracting the house guests.
He stepped bodily between Stephanie and the woman, his back forming a literal barrier. Lana's smile flickered, replaced by a quick, almost guilty glance at the butler.
Sorry, just haven't seen new faces in a while.
She waggled her fingers at Stephanie.
See you around, maybe.
Then, as quickly as she'd appeared, she retreated to the settee, curling herself back into the book like nothing had happened. The butler exhaled through his nose, straightened his cuffs, and gestured for Stephanie to follow. He muttered something under his breath, possibly in Latin, possibly a curse, and picked up the pace. Stephanie threw a last look over her shoulder. Through the crack in the door, she saw Lana perched on the edge of the settee, watching with a longing that made Stephanie's stomach twist. At the end of the corridor, a maid materialized, a teenager, hair scraped back into a bun so severe it made her eyes look enormous. She wore the same black and white uniform, and her presence seemed timed to the nanosecond.
If you'd come with me, Mum,
The maid said, voice flat but not unfriendly.
I'll show you to your mother.
Stephanie mumbled thanks, then trailed the maid, the duffel thumping against her hip. She didn't realize she was holding her breath until they turned another corner and the butler's footsteps finally faded. As they climbed the narrow back staircase, Stephanie's mind spun with the encounter. The scar. The way the woman's voice had leapt across the air, desperate for connection. The butler's terror, like he was afraid of what she might do, or say. It was like the house had its own physics, like everything that happened inside was happening in a separate, colder universe. The maid's shoes made no sound on the steps. At the landing, she paused and looked Stephanie up and down.
She's not usually like that.
The maid whispered, almost conspiratorial.
The lady in the lounge. She used to be different.
Stephanie nodded, unsure what to say. The maid frowned as if searching for the right words.
They say she lost her memory after the accident.
A quick, nervous glance down the hall.
Some days she remembers everything. Some days, nothing at all.
Stephanie felt the chill return.
What happened to her?
But the maid only shrugged, lips pressed thin.
Depends who you ask.
She said,
Sometimes she calls herself Lana, sometimes Serena. Just don't let the butler catch you talking to her, yeah?
Stephanie managed a nod, her pulse fluttering. She followed the maid into a staff corridor, the walls closing in, the carpet threadbare and the air cooler by several degrees. They passed a tiny kitchen where a man in a white apron chopped vegetables with surgical focus. The smell of onions and roasting meat clung to the air. At the end of the hallway was a cramped lounge, barely wide enough for a folding table and a couple of battered armchairs. Her mother was there, bundled in a tartan blanket on a narrow cot, her face pale and sweat-shiny. She looked so small, so breakable, that Stephanie's heart gave a nasty little lurch. She forgot the strangeness of the house, the butler, the scarred woman in the lounge. She rushed to her mother's side and knelt, clutching the limp hand in both of hers.
I'm here.
She whispered, and the words made something tighten behind her ribs.
I'm right here, Mum.
Her mother cracked open one eye, the pupils swimming.
Course you are.
She mumbled, voice shredded with fever.
Always the good girl.
Stephanie pressed her cheek to the back of her mother's hand, ignoring the scratch of calluses and the scent of sick. The rest of the world receded until all that remained was the two of them, joined at the knuckles. Margaret tried to sit up and failed, a cough shuddering through her shoulders.
Can't.
She managed.
Not allowed. Not until I'm.
She made a vague gesture that seemed to mean
Less of a biohazard.
Stephanie's jaw set.
They can shove their rules.
She said, voice low. She glanced around for a glass of water, found a plastic tumbler, and guided it to her mother's lips. Margaret drank, though most of it dribbled down her chin. The silence stretched, thickened by the hum of the ancient refrigerator and the slow tick of a battery clock over the door. Stephanie could hear footsteps moving somewhere above, the whole house creaking and breathing, as if eavesdropping. The butler reappeared, immaculate and inscrutable. He surveyed the scene, then addressed Margaret as if Stephanie weren't there.
Mrs. Wilcox, you will be taking leave for a minimum of 72 hours. The house cannot risk further contamination.
Margaret flinched at the reprimand, then nodded.
Of course, sir.
She said.
I'll gather my things.
The butler's gaze drifted to Stephanie, his disdain barely hidden.
Miss Wilcox, please escort your mother off the premises as soon as she is able.
Then he was gone again, leaving a vacuum in his wake. Stephanie helped her mother up, looping one arm around the bony shoulders. Margaret was so light she barely pulled at Stephanie's frame, but each step cost her. They made their slow progress down the back corridor, past the still simmering kitchen, the smell of roasting fat turning Stephanie's stomach. A few staff members watched from the corners of their eyes, their faces locked in masks of studied neutrality. At the foyer, Margaret paused, winded. She braced herself against a mahogany side table, breathing hard. Stephanie wiped a streak of sweat from her mother's temple.
Want to rest a sec?
She asked, keeping her voice soft. Margaret shook her head, teeth clenched.
Don't want to give them the satisfaction.
She muttered.
Help me outside.
Stephanie nodded, letting her mother set the pace. The chill in the marble entrance was a slap after the fug of the servants' quarters, but Margaret seemed grateful for it. She blinked at the sunlight as if seeing it for the first time. The drive circled the front garden, the cab still parked at the far end. Stephanie flagged the driver, who was already out, leaning against the hood smoking. He stubbed the cigarette on his heel and jogged up.
Need a hand, love?
He said, reaching for Margaret's other arm. They half carried her to the car, got her settled in the back seat. The driver closed the door gently, shooting Stephanie a look that managed both concern and polite indifference. Stephanie turned for one last look at the house. The front doors were closed now, the windows blank and reflecting the winter sun. There was no sign of Lana, Serena, anywhere. Only the memory of her, etched into the air like afterburn from staring at a light bulb. The drive home was mercifully short. Margaret slept, or pretended to, her breath shallow and uneven. Stephanie kept glancing over, checking for signs of consciousness, the living warmth of her mother's hand a necessary comfort. Every so often, the cab would rattle over a pothole, and Margaret would flinch, then settle back into silence. Stephanie watched the hedgerows and cattle grids slide by, her mind running its own fevered loop. The woman in the sitting room, Lana. She replayed the encounter again and again, searching for something she'd missed. The way she'd moved, the accent, the questions, the way her eyes had lit up at the sight of Stephanie's shoes. There was a hunger there, a rawness, like she was a wild animal who just caught a whiff of something familiar and forbidden. Stephanie gnawed her thumbnail, thinking of all the times her mother had warned her to keep her head down, not to get involved, not to ask questions above her station. But curiosity was its own kind of virus, and Stephanie had never built up immunity. They reached the edge of the village, their cottage a squat line of red brick and flint with a roof thatch in perpetual need of repair. The driver helped them to the front door, then, after Stephanie slipped him a tip, disappeared down the lane with a tired wave. Margaret collapsed onto the settee, head back, eyes closed. Stephanie fetched her a glass of water and a fresh towel, then hovered, unable to sit still.
Want to talk about it?
She asked after a stretch of silence. Margaret's eyelids fluttered.
Talk about what?
Stephanie hesitated. She thought of the butler's warning, the way the staff had watched her. The risk of breaking the unspoken code of the house.
The woman.
Stephanie said finally.
The one in the lounge. Lana, or Serena, I guess.
Margaret's brow knotted, the lines on her forehead deepening.
You saw her?
She talked to me.
Stephanie admitted.
She seemed off.
Margaret stared at the ceiling, lips pressed thin.
She's not supposed to.
She said.
Not to the staff. Not to anyone.
Why not?
It's house policy.
Margaret said, but the words sounded hollow.
For her own good.
Stephanie sat, knees bouncing.
Did you know her? Before the accident?
Margaret closed her eyes, face shuttered.
No, no one did. She just appeared one day.
She shivered, pulled the blanket tighter.
Best not to think about it, Steph. Let them handle their own messes.
Stephanie nodded, but she could feel the idea germinating inside her, roots curling around the base of her skull. The way the woman had looked at her, the desperation, the spark of recognition, gnawed at her in a way she couldn't ignore. She spent the rest of the afternoon tending to her mother, brewing tea, running a cool cloth over her forehead, changing the bedsheets when the fever sweat soaked through. She was careful, methodical, like a nurse on her first day of training. She wanted to keep her mother alive, but she also needed to know more. That night, after Margaret had drifted into a deep, medicated sleep, Stephanie went to the living room and opened her laptop. She Googled the names: Lana Hartfield, Serena Rose, Chad Owens, London. She trawled through pages of links, news stories, images. Most were paywalled or buried behind lifestyle blogs and rumor sites. But the name Serena Rose came up again and again, linked to modeling, charity galas, high-profile disappearances. She stared at a tabloid photo, a woman in a mirrored dress, posing for the cameras, eyes fixed forward with the same haunted hunger she'd seen in the lounge. The scar above the eyebrow wasn't there, but the eyes, amber, gold-flecked, impossible to mistake, were the same. Stephanie pressed a thumb to the screen, covering half the face. The resemblance was uncanny, the look of someone halfway between wanting to run and wanting to fight. She closed the laptop, lay back on the rug, and stared at the cracked plaster of the ceiling, her mind spinning out theories and possibilities. The house, the butler, the staff. All of them were keeping secrets, and so was the woman with the scar. Stephanie didn't know how deep it went, but she knew in her marrow that she wouldn't be able to leave it alone. She lay there in the darkness, listening to her mother's soft, even breathing from the other room, and whispered into the empty air,
I'll find you, whoever you are.
The promise felt heavier than she'd expected, a weight that settled over her like the thick, ancient air in the mansion's corridors. But it was a good kind of weight, the kind that meant she still had something to fight for.
The chandelier drips silver tears tonight. Your gloved hand spins me like a cursed kite.